Great Commission is a command from Jesus to all of us to go and make disciples of all nations, which means all of us, through our praying, our giving, our going, together, we all have a part to play in seeing the gospel spread to the ends of the earth.
Well, within that first year of planting our church, before we were really ready to do an overseas trip, we knew we wanted to go. When a particular team goes, I mean, the whole church feels like we're all going. We're going with them. This is what we do as sent ones.
It's just a privilege to be able to be sent.
I think about all of the people who've invested in us. We stand on the shoulders of thousands and thousands and thousands of people who've gone before us.
I have the privilege of really shepherding my children's hearts. We want them to not only hear about missions, we want them to understand it the way God wants us to. You share with those around you, you share with those in America, and then you share around the world.
We get up at 6 and we pray for the missionaries.
I don't think there's anything quite as powerful to me as someone coming up to me and say, I prayed for you, or I'm praying for you.
And you see all the hurt in the world, you see the needs, you see what you have, and you're able to help other people who want to give, even though we're small, even when we don't want to, even when we feel like it's hard. We want to show the love of Christ and lavishly give grace in the things that we can give as He's given to us.
It's not, all about what I can get out of it. It's about God's love for me and how that changes my heart to share that with everyone else that I meet. And so it's kind of changed the way that I do my business. So I see these two groups at work. You've got a group of churches who are praying and giving and sending out missionaries, and a group of missionaries then who are spreading the gospel in some of the hardest, most difficult, dangerous to reach places and peoples in the world. And together, there's a unity there that is resounding to the glory of God. In partnership with you, the IMB sends and supports missionaries all over the world, and the Lottie Christmas offering is a critical part of that support. 100% of gifts that you give to the Lottie Moon Christmas offering go directly to missionaries who are spreading the gospel among the nations.
Testing 1, 2, 3. It's going to work here. There we go. I think we're on. It is great to be here. And for those of you who were here 25 years ago, I was not the David Crane that led in music during one of your revivals. But when we were on the field, I got a letter from a member of the WMU in one of our churches asking for one of my CDs. So I wrote her back and said, if you find one, would you send it to me? Anyhow, it's great to be here. Joy and I live in Denton. We came back a year ago, Thanksgiving Day, surprised her parents. They did not know we were going to arrive on that day. They were expecting us 2 or 3 weeks later. And we're able to take a midnight flight from Bogota, Colombia, to arrive at DFW at 6 a.m. in the morning and walk in and see their jaws drop. But we're able to spend Thanksgiving a meal with them, with the entire family. We've been here ever since. And then as of April 1st, began working with Denton Baptist Association as Hispanic Associate for our 7 Hispanic churches and 2 church plants that we have currently in Denton County. But I would say Joy was almost homegrown in Denton. She really was born in New Mexico, and I was born in Old Mexico. But as soon as we could, we got to Texas. That's what we tried to do. But anyhow, I majored in music. I was born and raised in Mexico. Like I said, my parents were Southern Baptist missionaries to Mexico for 36 years. And I met Joy as a music student at North Texas State University, for those of you who remember that title. Started off as a piano major and decided I needed to practice 6 hours a day, every day, to get an A in piano. And I decided I couldn't sit still that long every day. So I switched to choral education with a piano concentration where I just had to practice 3 hours a day. And I did that just fine. But graduated, met Joy, and went off to Earth, Texas. Anybody know where Earth, Texas is? Spring Lake Earth ISD as a music teacher. And did that for 3 years. If you don't know where Earth is, if you get to Muleshoe, Texas, come 18 miles east, and you'll get to Earth, just to let you know kind of where it is. And realized very soon that I needed a sweetheart out there with me. And I asked Joy to marry me. And we spent 3 years both with the Spring Lake Earth ISD teaching music, all levels, elementary, middle school, and high school. And then Joy finishing her piano pedagogy degree at Texas Tech. And then came, I taught everything I knew. By the end of the 3 years, decided I needed a master's degree. And ended up at Southwestern Seminary and got a master's in church music. And then taught another 3 years outside of Rutherford, Texas, in 3 county schools. And at that time, God said, it's time for you now to go overseas. And Joy and I went as music missionaries to Colombia, South America. And Colombia spelled with an O, not a U, just a little difference there, but that's very common in the way we speak English. But we went there to do music missions. And then did a variety of things during that time. And I'll talk about some of the experiences we had in just a minute. But then came back, and now I'm working with as a Hispanic associate. But to let you know, my wife she's earned, the gray hair she has earned every one of those hairs, having to put up with me. Okay? We didn't know exactly what the problem was when we were dating, except that I would do things at times that most people didn't do them. I'd say something that seemed a little inappropriate. I'd speak my mind when I should have kept my mouth closed. And I'd laugh when things weren't necessarily funny, things like that. She had to kind of get used to me. But as we were going through the appointment process, one of our veteran missionaries spoke to all of us about our MKs, missionary kids. Now they're called third culture kids, and what they were going to be. And she said something like this: your children are not going to be normal Americans. They're also not going to be normal kids from the country that you're going to go to. They're going to be third culture kids. And as soon as she said that, Joy looked at me, pointed her finger at me and said, "That's it." She had finally figured me out. Why I was so weird. And so that kind of gives you an idea, a glimpse into our relationship here. But Colombia, what do you know about Colombia? Well, back then when we went, of course, the main thing was the drugs. But lately, Colombia's been in the news, and especially the part of Colombia that Joy and I ministered in for 30 years. You may have heard about the plane that crashed last Monday, bringing a soccer team to Medellin, Colombia, to play in the first of 2 games in the final of the South American tournament. That happened 8.2 miles away from the airport it was supposed to have landed in. And that's the area where Joy and I live. And then a week ago tonight, on 60 Minutes, you may have watched the segment on early onset Alzheimer's, that they have finally found a family they can use as a case study. There's probably 5,000 family members, of which 1,000 have early onset Alzheimer's. That family lives right outside of Medellin, Colombia, as well. So it's kind of interesting to be able to see the images on TV of where we lived for 30 years. And that Alzheimer's piece got me to thinking. One mutation of one chromosome in the DNA brings this on, and it's automatic. There's nothing that medical science can do about it. Just one alteration. And what I'd like to speak with you about this morning is how the gospel DNA penetrates so many different cultures. In the video, you saw how David Platt was talking about so many different peoples in hard-to-reach areas. And have you ever asked yourself, what is heaven going to look like when we're surrounding the throne and peoples from every family of the earth are worshiping Jesus together? What language are they going to sing? What expressions are they going to have? It's going to look so different from the way we express our personal relationship with Christ within our own culture. That's what we faced when we got to Colombia. And you have to realize that Spaniards who conquered most of Latin America over 500 years ago, after they came in, they brought their religion with them, and their priests came and began to teach. And I learned something observing Latin Americans over the years. The Jesuits learned from Solomon when they said, give me a child and let me raise them and train them, and they won't leave their religion when they're adults. And the institutional religion became part of culture and is a part of culture even to this day. And in our area of Colombia, basically the society, I would call it a shame-based society. We're more of a guilt, not guilt, but right and wrong, and we stand up to these things. But you go to Latin America and you invite somebody to come to a birthday party or to come to church or that type of thing, they will almost always look at you and say yes, but then they don't show up. And you'd say, well, that's hypocritical. But if you look at it from their standpoint, it's not. Because what they're doing is they want you. They don't want you to lose face. They don't want to say no to you because that would be negative and you'd have a bad experience. So in dealing with in a society where we're used to saying what we think, or at least to do it diplomatically, in this society, we couldn't do that. Everybody would say yes, but then they wouldn't. And so how do you get around that? How do you do that? And it's through developing relationships. But it's not anything different than what the Apostle Paul went through. If you think about Paul, when he was Saul, back before his name changed, he was a Jew. And according to the strictest sense of Jewish religion, he observed the law the best he could, had the best teacher. And then when Christianity began to come on the scene, what did he do? He didn't agree with it. He persecuted it. But what changed Paul? As he's going on that road to Damascus, Jesus appears to him personally and shakes the foundation of his very being. That's exciting, and Paul's excited, but when he begins then to share with those around him, the Jews that he has grown up with, they don't share his enthusiasm. All of a sudden, he was now an outsider when he had been an insider all of his life. And as we shared the gospel, we found the same thing. In Colombian society, and especially the area of Colombia where we were at, decisions are made by the group. If you watched any of the film having to do with the memorial service for that soccer team, the 71 people who died out of the 85 or so, 86, no, it's not even that many, it was less because only 6 survived. But as you saw, the night that that game was supposed to take place, the stadium was full. Everyone came, and as a society, they expressed their condolences to the Brazilians who had lost their lives. And it was a group effort, so much so that even the soccer team, the club, has petitioned the South American Soccer Federation to name the Brazilian team champion of this tournament and give them the trophy and the $2 million that go with it, in solidarity to someone who had suffered tragedy. Can you imagine a Cowboy fan doing that if the Redskins were to win the NFL? It wouldn't happen, right? But everything is done as a group. And it's very important to all of us do it together because we don't lose face as we do these type of things. And this is what we were facing. So when people, all of a sudden, we'd share the gospel with them, and Jesus would touch them personally. And for the first time in their lives, they were sure of the hope of going to heaven. They were now faced with the same thing Paul was faced with. But you were baptized as a baby. Why do you want to get baptized again? You're going against all of what your family has taught you. And it becomes a very real conflict for people who are entering God's kingdom through a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. You may have read in the associational newsletter about the Elf Shelves program First Baptist Church Denton does every year. And this year, for the first time, 2 of our Hispanic churches partnered with them in sharing the gospel with many of the Hispanic families that go through this program to receive Christmas gifts for their children. I think there were 469 families represented that this weekend received their gifts. But of the 155 people who accepted the Lord in the gospel presentation, 127 of them were Hispanic. And it was exciting. But now our pastors of these 2 churches are facing the very same thing. They're following up with those who accepted Jesus, and guess what? Much less than 50% of those who have prayed to receive Christ are interested in attending church because they have a church family. They're not going to leave that. Leaving their institutional religion is like leaving their culture. Very much like in Colombia with our indigenous peoples. When somebody in the tribe receives Jesus as their Savior, the rest of the tribe moves them off the property because they're no longer part of that indigenous tribe. They've betrayed their ancestors, and they're no longer worthy of even living in society with the rest of their indigenous family. And so you face that as you come into personal relationship with Jesus. And there's verses of the Bible that help to understand the conflict. Peter, of all the apostles, Peter, who was always the guy that, spoke before he thought, and really he spoke with his heart, at the end of his life said the following thing in 1 Peter 3:14. Do not fear what they fear. He's talking to new Jewish believers who didn't live in Israel. Do not fear what they fear. Do not be frightened. But in your hearts set apart Christ as Lord. And the first story I want to tell you is about a young girl, very much the age of this young girl right here when she accepted Jesus, Sophia, who is now, I believe, about 9 years old at this point. But she saw her aunt and the influence of her aunt when she accepted Christ at 13, and how she went against her family in order to do this. And when her aunt got to the point, she was a young adult and met a fella. They fell in love. He had accepted the Lord through her witness. And then when they got ready for them to be married, she said, I want to be married and not in my Baptist church. Her mother said, I'm not coming to the wedding. But she did come finally. Her family talked her into it. She actually hosted a reception after that. But that opened the door for us to be able to visit her mother. And yet her mother has not accepted the Lord yet. She's still staunchly believing in her traditions. But when Sophia saw all of this happening growing up, she started attending our house church with her aunt and with her mother. Her mother accepted the Lord. And then she realized, I want to make this decision too. I want to give my life to Jesus. And she did. Exciting moment. And she announced it to her aunt, to her mother. And then when it came time to think about baptism, that's when things got dicey. And she started expressing fear to her mother about this. And we would talk to her, but I knew that if I tried to coax her and to encourage her and all of that, she probably would do it. But she needed to do it of her own accord. She needed to set Christ as Lord in her heart. And this is what she went through, and she still hasn't been baptized. This was 3 years ago. But she said, you know, I think I'm going to do it like my aunt. I'm going to wait till I'm 13 years old, and then I'm going to announce that I'm a Christian. And then I'll be baptized like she was. But she said this is the issue she faced. Her father was not a believer. And she said it this way, I don't want my father to be sad, and I don't want my grandmother to be mad. She would be, when she's baptized, the first child in her entire family to go against her infant baptism in order to show that Christ is now the Lord of the heart. That's the tension that we live in this society. But then you have to pay the price. That's what it's about. And we had a young lady named Lottie who started attending our house group with her boyfriend. And this is one of those interesting cultural issues that I'll be glad to share with as we eat our meal. She and her boyfriend are now, they've been engaged for how many years, Joy? Well, it's 15 at least now. It was 10 several years ago. They're totally in love with each other, but because of responsibilities to their aging parents, they're the designated child in their family to basically take care of their parents in their aging years and stay with them until their parents pass away. And so they're waiting to get married until her mother and his father finally pass away. But she, anyhow, was attending our Bible studies with her boyfriend, and come to find out that she realized that she was a believer. Not because she had come forward and prayed like we normally do, but she had been attending church with her boyfriend for now 2 years or so. And when they were going through a study of experiencing God, Henry Blackaby, it dawned on her she was totally committed to Christ. No questions about it. She just never knew when it happened. Kind of like Billy Graham's wife. I think her testimony is somewhat similar. She never could pinpoint the exact time that she asked Jesus into her life. Well, I just assumed that because she was a believer, she had been baptized. But 3 years later, she walked out to join me and she said, you know, I think I'm ready to be baptized. Shocked us. We thought she'd been baptized before she came to our group. So we worked on getting the time set for a Sunday afternoon at one of our church buildings for the baptism. And I told her this would be a great time for you to invite your mother and your sister and your niece and nephew and any other family members and friends you'd like to as a witness to them. And she looked at us straight in the eye and she said, I do not want to invite my mother because I want this to be a joyous occasion. It's so special to me. I don't want her messing things up. And I thought, now, that seems a little different from the way we think about it, doesn't it? So she came by herself. She was baptized with our church family there. And when she got home that afternoon, her mother looked at her and she said, you got baptized, didn't you? I could tell because your hair's wet. And she said, yes. But to this day now, her mother will not go to sleep until Lottie has come home and they can have a time of prayer. She considers her daughter her spiritual guide. And so as she still battles all of her cultural issues, she has seen the change that has happened in her daughter. And she says, well, we're praying that she will say, I want that too. So that's another story. But you have to pay the price. And sometimes paying the price in your own family is a lot more difficult than it is with strangers. The conclusion to all of this is that relationship with your family is paramount as you share Christ in other cultures. I'm going to do it. I'm going to tell you one more story about a national policeman who also came into our house church. His name, Wilson. He and his common-law wife were having difficulties, and temperaments would flare. And finally, one day, for one time that I know of, he just hauled off with him. And she was scared. She asked to come to our Bible study, evening Bible study. And it was strange because her husband's sister was a member of our group. And I didn't know how that was going to work. But she was frightened. And she came to our meeting, and we presented the gospel to her. And she accepted the Lord. And we said, now, what do you want to do? Do you want to spend the night here with us? Or do you want to go back home? She says, I want to go back home. And when she walked in the house, he had left the house. It scared him too, to be honest. He had never done this. And as he waited for her to come in, when she came in, he said, now, where have you been? And all she would tell him was, I've been talking to God. And he said, are you okay? She said, yes. Well, that began a time of relating to both of them. And over a year's period of time, we got to a point where Joy and I said, we're going to try one more time to share the gospel with Wilson. And that Friday morning, we had set it a noontime to go and take pizza to his apartment when he was on lunch break from his police work. And he had 2 hours for break. And we were going to present the gospel to him one last time, as far as our efforts were concerned. He called me that morning before we went, and he said, David said, this morning God spoke to me. And he said, you've been hearing about a personal relationship with me. What's keeping you from doing that? And I said, well, we'll come in at noon. Let's talk. And so we got there, and he is a totally atypical Latin American male, because he has to talk everything out loud. He has to process out loud. You think women are the ones who normally do this. But Wilson has to just talk things through, and we'd be talking, and all of a sudden it's like going around a bush. And he'd start repeating some of the things that he was thinking. And Joy got to a point where she said, what's he doing to me? And I caught it. I said, hold on. I know what's happening here. And sure enough, after 2 hours, he said, I want to do this. And so I led him in prayer. And then I said, now Wilson, I want you to talk to God directly. You express the decision you have just made to God in your own words. And this is the only time I have ever experienced this. But as Wilson, in his roundabout way, started speaking to God and opening the door of his life to Jesus so that he would come in and take over, God opened the curtains of heaven to me. And I got to hear the angels rejoicing. It was such a marvelous experience. That's not happened since. But as Wilson prayed, I could hear the angels rejoicing because he was coming into the kingdom. But it's the relationship with the king that makes the difference in whatever society we're in. David Platt a month ago talked about how when Paul and Barnabas went on their missionary journeys, what made that so effective? And he said 3 things. He said they were united by the gospel of God. They were enthralled in the worship of God. You remember that the leaders were praying and fasting when the Holy Spirit said, set these 2 aside for the task I have. And they were intensely focused on the mission of God. And as we come, that's what drives us in our mission efforts. As we go through this week, as we think about supporting this Lottie Moon emphasis on international missions, I would like to share with you 6 things that you can pray for missionaries as God brings them to your heart. And we're going to see them here. The first one is that they be rescued from unbelievers. Now this is Paul talking. Throughout the book of Acts and in the 13 books he wrote, in 20 occasions he prayed for others but at times he asked others to pray for him. And these were the requests that Paul made. The first is that they will be rescued from unbelievers. Who are unbelievers? Those who don't have faith. Why do you want to be rescued from them? Well, in Paul's case, it wasn't that he was afraid of them. He just knew there were so many more people that still needed to hear the gospel that he didn't want to be cumbered by those who were outwardly and actively opposing him. So he said, help pray that I will be rescued from those who don't have faith. The second thing is, pray that missionary service will be acceptable to the saints. Now, why would Paul? Now, he was referring to those in Jerusalem when he went back to be with them. Why would he pray that the service would be acceptable to the saints? Because there were a lot of Jews, and remember in the church in Jerusalem, there were a lot of former priests who had come to the faith, who had heard that Paul was teaching, you no longer keep the law. You no longer do this. You no longer do that. It's by grace. And they were opposing Paul. I remember my father speaking about his missions experience. And the story he used to tell was the following. When God called him and my mother to go to Mexico, he said he was going to a country where that country had lost 1/2 of its total territory to the United States back in 1848 and 1850. 2 different treaties. Mexico granted the United States property which includes Texas, New Mexico, California going up. Half of Mexican real estate became property of the United States. And in the curriculum of every child going to school in Mexico, they are taught about the children who gave their lives defending the castle of Chapultepec in Mexico from the U.S. invasion. And he said, you know, in Mexico you don't say, remember the Alamo. And you don't sing from the halls of Montezuma. And there's a resentment that is built up, and is every Mexican child is trained in this. And as he went as a missionary, and he dealt with his brothers and sisters in Christ in Mexico, they still remembered the history. And he said, I learned that I had to earn their respect, because I had to live out the faith and the calling that God had made on my life. And I had to do it in a humble way among them. And he said, it comes, but you do pay a price when you leave your U.S. I'm not sure what word to use here. Can I use the word pride? Yeah. And replace it with kingdom pride. And you work together shoulder to shoulder, advancing the gospel of Christ. So pray that their service will be acceptable to the believers for they are ministering. 3, pray that God will open the door for the message. God is the one who attracts people to the gospel. It's not us. We're just the vehicles he uses. So pray. And sometimes that message takes a while, doesn't it? And then, 4th, pray that God would give them the courage to proclaim the message fearlessly. We were taught in our latter years in church planting movements that the only way to know if someone is really a person of peace is to share the gospel. Not just to eat a meal with them, not just to go to functions with them, but to share the gospel with them. And that is difficult to do at times. You have to be willing and know when the right time is and how to do it. So pray that they would have the courage to do so. And then 5, pray that they will be able to make the message clear and plain to the people they witness to. There's a story in missions history about a man named Jonathan Goforth. Back in the early 1900s, he was a Canadian Presbyterian who went to China as a missionary along with his wife. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to learn another language or not, but they say Chinese is the most difficult language to learn. And linguists say if that's true, why do Chinese children learn it without any problem? You know, you grow up with it. But when you're an adult, it is difficult. And Jonathan in his autobiography said he struggled with all the tones of the Chinese language, And in Chinese language, when you end a word, if the tone stays the same, it means one thing. If the tone goes up, it means something different. And if the tone goes down at the end, it means something totally different. And he struggled, and he never could communicate clearly with the Chinese he was trying to teach and witness to. But he said one day, he was at chapel service, and he preached. And when he finished, the Chinese people said, "Say more, teach us more. We want to stay here, keep talking." And when he got home, he told his wife, "Rosalind, this has never happened before. I finished and they didn't want me to finish. They were understanding everything I said." And about 2 months later, after that day, he received a letter from his fellow Christian college mates in Canada, who said that on a certain night, they had the urge, God just simply laid an urge on their hearts to get together and pray for Gopal. And they said, we didn't know why we needed to pray for you. So I'm writing this letter to ask you what happened. And when he did the comparison, the night that his college friends were praying for him in Canada was the day that he was speaking in that chapel service. Are your prayers important? Yes, they are. So pray that they can share the message clearly. And finally, pray that the message of the Lord will spread rapidly and beyond. Paul was in Corinth when he wrote these. And he was asking the folks, the believers in Thessalonica, would you pray for me? I would love for the gospel to spread as fast as it did when I was with you guys. You guys opened your heart to the gospel. And you encouraged others to do the same. And I'm not having the same results either. Pray for me that the same results will happen. So I hope this helps. As you think of missionaries, as you know of missionaries in this area that have gone to different parts, when you begin praying for them, it's okay to pray, God bless the missionaries. That's great. But then if God brings it to your mind, begin to say, yeah, God, help them be rescued from those who don't have faith. Open the door for the message. Give them the courage to proclaim it. Help them make it as clear as possible. And you will be a vital part of what God accomplishes through them. When we joined our in Columbia, we got a chance to speak. I would always end the service saying, I'd rather have 5 minutes of your prayer for me than $5 from your heart. Now, the IMB didn't want to hear that. But I tell you what, the dollars that you gave to Lottie Moon paid for my college education at North Texas State. Back then, when it was a lot cheaper than it is now. But you helped me throughout all these years. And now, as I'm on the other end of the missions statement here, I want to continue to encourage you to continue being faithful to what we can do, not only as an association of churches, but as a convention of churches, supporting 4,800 missionaries all around the world in a way that we couldn't as an individual church. So I pray that you continue doing that. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning and to get to share with you.